For years, the world watched one of Hollywood's biggest stars rise higher and higher, while the smallest part of his life quietly slipped further out of reach. Behind red carpets, billion-dollar franchises, and global fame, a silent story was unfolding. Not about movies, but about a father and the daughter who grew up without him. Suri Cruise never asked for fame, yet it followed her from the moment she was born. She inherited a name recognized everywhere, even when she wished it didn't belong to her. And as she grew older, the distance between her and her father didn't just widen, it hardened. Now at 19, she's speaking through her choices, not her interviews. A new name, a new identity, a new direction. And every move she makes sends a message louder than any headline ever has. This is the story of a daughter who learned to navigate the world without the man everyone assumed would always be by her side. And a father whose silence created the deepest mystery of all. It all started in 2005, when two completely different worlds collided at the height of their fame. Katie Holmes was 26, fresh-faced, hopeful, and still glowing from her success on Dawson's Creek. She carried the energy of someone who believed life could still surprise her. Tom Cruise was 43, already a global icon with decades of blockbuster power behind him. His smile could sell out theaters. His name alone could shut down entire streets. For Katie, Tom wasn't just another Hollywood crush. Years earlier, she'd told 17 magazine that her dream was to marry him, a comment that sounded playful at the time, like something a young actress would say to fill a page. But fate had a strange way of turning jokes into headlines. The moment Tom met her, he reportedly told his team, "I'm going to marry her." And suddenly the fantasy started moving like a script already written. Their connection didn't grow slowly. It exploded. Within weeks, they went from strangers to the most talked about couple on the planet. Cameras caught them laughing in Rome like two people who didn't care who was watching. Even Tom, famously private, seemed transformed. He wasn't just in love, he was consumed by it. Then came the moment that turned their romance into a global spectacle. Tom jumping on Oprah's couch, shouting, smiling, unable to sit still. Some viewers called it sweet, others called it strange. But no matter the opinion, everyone agreed on one thing. Tom Cruise looked like a man who had lost all sense of reservation. Their whirlwind love reached its peak on April 18, 2006, when their daughter, Suri, was born. Tom called it the happiest day of my life, describing her as a miracle. But even that moment came with a twist. The pregnancy and birth were shaped by Scientology traditions, including a silent delivery room where no one was allowed to speak. Tom even bought his own sonogram machine to monitor the pregnancy at home, an act that outsiders found intense, but he saw as devotion. To the world, it looked like a fairy tale. Two stars wildly in love, welcoming a beautiful daughter into their perfect story. But behind the celebrations, something far more complicated was beginning to take shape, something that would eventually pull all three of them in completely different directions. By late 2006, Tom and Katie's love story looked untouchable. Their wedding that November was something out of a royal fantasy, a $3 million celebration inside a centuries-old Italian castle, surrounded by fireworks, designer gowns, and some of the biggest names in Hollywood. Jennifer Lopez, the Beckhams, Will Smith. The guest list looked more like an awards show than a ceremony. Katie walked down the aisle in custom Armani. Tom stood waiting with the glowing confidence of a man who believed he had everything: the career, the woman he adored, and the newborn daughter he called a miracle. On the surface, it was perfection, the kind the world loves to believe in. But beneath the glamour, subtle fractures were already forming. Katie's parents, lifelong Catholics from Ohio, watched the celebration with forced smiles. To them, the world surrounding their daughter felt unfamiliar, powerful, secretive, and deeply tied to Scientology's inner circle. They didn't say much. They couldn't. But they sensed the shift long before the public did. Inside the marriage, the routines became more controlled, more structured, more guarded. Scientology wasn't just a belief system in Tom's life. It was an entire environment, and that environment began shaping everything around them. Decisions, communication, privacy. Slowly, Katie realized she wasn't just marrying a superstar. She was stepping into a system she didn't fully understand. Tom believed in it wholeheartedly. To him, the rules, the traditions, the silence, the discipline, it all came from a place of love and purpose. But for Katie, the same walls began to feel like a cage. The sparkle that once made their romance look effortless started dimming behind closed doors, and right at the center of all of it was Suri, a child born into a world where smiles on red carpets could hide 1,000 unspoken fears at home. The outside world still saw perfection, but behind the polished photos and glamorous headlines, the first signs of a much deeper storm were quietly taking shape. As time passed, the fairy tale began to shift in ways the public couldn't see. Katie's world grew smaller, not from fame, but from the quiet presence that followed her everywhere. Friends noticed she rarely stepped outside alone. Whether it was dinner, a walk, or a simple errand, someone from Tom's inner circle was always close by, calm and observant, like silent guards who never broke formation. To outsiders, it looked like protection, but to those familiar with Scientology's structure, it was something else: supervision, a subtle reminder that Katie's life was no longer entirely her own. One night over dinner, she told journalist Maureen Orth, "Oh, we don't go outside very much." It sounded innocent, almost like small talk, but the words hinted at a deeper truth. Her freedom was shrinking, and the world around her was becoming tightly controlled. Tom, meanwhile, remained fully devoted to Scientology, confident, disciplined, and fiercely loyal to its teachings. He saw structure as love and commitment, but what felt grounding to him felt suffocating to Katie. Her parents saw the change every time they visited, their once bright daughter now quieter, repeating the same lines about Tom as if trying to reassure herself. Tom's older children, Bella and Connor, were already deeply rooted in Scientology, and Tom naturally expected Suri to grow into the same path. But Katie wasn't ready to hand over that kind of influence, not when she didn't understand the system shaping it, not when she felt herself slowly disappearing inside it. So, quietly, carefully, she started pulling back, watching, thinking, planning, preparing for a moment she knew had to be executed with absolute precision. From the outside, nothing looked wrong, but inside, Katie Holmes was getting ready to rewrite her daughter's future before it was written for her. By 2010, Katie wasn't just uncomfortable, she was preparing. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the careful way someone moves when they know they're being watched. She began taking small steps that looked harmless to everyone else, but were part of a much bigger plan. She reconnected with old friends. She started spending more time in New York, away from the routines that surrounded Tom in Los Angeles. She attended events less often, skipped certain Scientology functions, and slowly created distance without announcing anything at all. But behind the scenes, she was working with purpose. Katie changed her phone. She hired new security. She replaced staff she worried were reporting back to Scientology handlers. Every move she made was deliberate, quiet, and disguised as normal life. Her father, Martin Holmes, a lawyer with a reputation for sharp strategy, stepped in as the silent architect. Years earlier, he had helped write the prenup. Now he was helping his daughter prepare an exit that wouldn't just free her, but would protect Suri for the rest of her life. Katie's biggest fear wasn't Tom. It was the possibility that her daughter might one day be pushed deeper into the same system she was fighting to escape. Former Scientologists later claimed she was terrified Suri could be directed toward strict church programs as she grew older, programs Katie felt she couldn't control. So she kept moving quietly, gathering information, building support, and waiting for the moment when she could make one move that changed everything. To the world, she still looked like Tom Cruise's glowing wife, but internally, she had already made the decision. She wasn't planning to leave him. She was planning to protect her daughter, no matter the cost. On June 29, 2012, Hollywood stopped in disbelief. Katie Holmes had filed for divorce from Tom Cruise, and the news hit him while he was in Iceland filming Oblivion. He later admitted he never saw it coming, saying quietly, "It hit me hard." But what looked sudden to the world was actually the final move in a plan she had crafted with extreme precision. For months, Katie prepared behind the scenes. She switched phones, hired new security, and replaced anyone she feared was tied to Scientology. She chose New York as the place to file, knowing its custody laws favored the parent seeking to protect a child. Her father, Martin Holmes, a lawyer known for strategy, helped her navigate every step. Together, they built an exit strong enough to hold against one of Hollywood's most powerful forces. When court documents became public, her motive was unmistakable. Katie wanted full control of her daughter's upbringing, schooling, medical decisions, and, most importantly, spiritual direction. Her concern wasn't Tom as a father, but the system around him. Former Scientologists claimed she feared that as Suri grew older, she could be pushed towards strict church programs she didn't understand or trust. The divorce was finalized in just 11 days, an unheard-of speed for a case involving a global superstar. Tom agreed to child support and education costs, but money wasn't what Katie fought for. What she wanted most was separation, and she secured it completely. The day after the settlement, she and Suri left Los Angeles quietly and reappeared in New York with no guards, no entourage, just the two of them walking down a busy street. Katie looked exhausted, but for the first time in years, her smile looked real. Free, certain. And for Suri, that new freedom came with a sudden, painful shift. The father who once called her his miracle was no longer part of her daily life. Not through conflict, not through anger, just absence. And that silence would shape everything that came next. After the divorce, Tom Cruise's world and his daughter's world split in two completely different directions. There was no dramatic confrontation, no public statements, no drawn-out custody battle. Just a quiet divide that deepened year after year. In 2013, during a rare deposition for an unrelated lawsuit, lawyers asked Tom directly whether Katie had left to protect Suri from Scientology. At first, he pushed back, calling the question offensive, but eventually he acknowledged that it was one of the reasons. It was the closest he ever came to publicly admitting what had been happening behind closed doors. Reports at the time said that Tom saw his daughter only once after the divorce, a private meeting that was never photographed, never confirmed by either side, and never repeated. After that, there were no more sightings, no pictures, no moments caught by paparazzi. For a man constantly in front of cameras, the silence surrounding his relationship with Suri was louder than any headline. Meanwhile, Tom buried himself in his work. Mission, impossible films, global press tours, dangerous stunts performed at impossible heights. He seemed to throw everything into his career. Every year brought a new blockbuster, a new daring stunt, a new spotlight, but none of those milestones included his youngest child. Katie, on the other hand, built a world for Suri that looked nothing like Hollywood. She enrolled her in a private Manhattan school, walked her to classes, sat beside her at dance recitals, and spent afternoons in small cafes and city parks. She did everything she could to give her daughter the one thing she never had herself, a normal childhood. By her teenage years, Suri had become a calm, grounded young woman. Friends described her as bright, warm, and surprisingly down-to-earth for someone born into celebrity chaos. She looked more like her mother every year. Same eyes, same gentle smile, same quiet strength. But whenever someone mentioned her father, she simply changed the subject. Tom continued to support her financially, covering her education and health expenses. But the emotional connection, the real bond, never returned. A decade passed with no public interaction between them. Not a single photo, not a single statement, not a single moment shared. It was as if their lives had floated to opposite ends of the world, running parallel, yet never touching. And for Suri, that distance wasn't just physical. It became part of her identity, a silence she carried into her next chapter, where she would make a decision that surprised everyone who remembered her last name. As Suri grew older, she quietly began shaping a life far removed from Hollywood and her father's spotlight. New York became her escape, a place where she could simply be herself instead of Tom Cruise's daughter. She attended LaGuardia High School, a haven for young artists, and threw herself into singing, acting, and directing small projects with her classmates. For once, she wasn't being followed or analyzed. She was just a teenager exploring her talent. Then came the moment that revealed how much she had changed. In her senior year, the school program for the Addams Family musical listed her not as Suri Cruise, but as Suri Noel, using her mother's middle name. It was subtle, but powerful. A quiet declaration of independence, a step away from a last name that carried too much weight and too many memories. When she graduated in 2024, that same name appeared on the official list. Tom wasn't there. He was seen thousands of miles away at a Taylor Swift concert in London, but Katie was in the crowd, cheering with the full pride of a mother who had fought to give her daughter a life defined by safety and freedom. That summer, Suri began studying fashion at Carnegie Mellon University. Katie helped her move into her dorm like any regular parent, with no cameras or bodyguards, just two people trying to build a normal moment. By then, it was clear. Suri was no longer living in her father's shadow. She was building her own identity, one choice at a time. College marked a fresh start for Suri, a chapter she created entirely on her own. At Carnegie Mellon University, she focused on fashion, writing music on the side, and living quietly without the weight of Hollywood on her shoulders. Her life finally looked normal, something she and her mother had worked years to build. Katie stayed close, helping her settle into her dorm and visiting whenever she could. Their bond, strengthened by everything they'd survived, looked unbreakable. There were no entourages, no security teams, no cameras trailing behind them, just a mother and daughter navigating real life. Then, in the fall of 2025, a moment in New York reminded everyone just how human Suri was. She was photographed sitting on a doorstep with her head in her hands, exhausted and overwhelmed. Minutes later, Katie arrived, sat beside her, and wrapped her in quiet comfort. They talked softly before walking off together for pastries, a simple, tender moment that said more about their relationship than any interview ever could. To strangers, it looked like a normal mother calming her daughter, but to anyone who knew their story, it was a reminder of how tightly they've held on to each other through every shift, every escape, and every silence. By now, Suri wasn't just distancing herself from her father's world. She was shaping her own, guided by her mother's strength and her own determination. But even as she grew stronger, one thing remained unchanged: the silent gap between her and the man who had once called her his miracle. Today, at 19, Suri is firmly in control of her own life. She's studying fashion, writing her own music, and building an identity that no longer depends on anyone's last name. People who've met her describe her as grounded, thoughtful, and quietly confident. A young woman shaped more by resilience than by fame. Her relationship with her father, however, remains unchanged. Tom continues to support her financially, covering her education and medical needs, but emotionally, the distance has only grown. More than a decade has passed without a single public photo, sighting, or confirmed moment shared between them. Tom's career, on the other hand, has only climbed higher. He's preparing for one of the most ambitious projects Hollywood has ever seen, filming scenes in outer space with NASA and SpaceX. The man who has conquered the box office again and again is now looking beyond Earth itself. Yet the one connection he hasn't been able to rebuild is the one closest to home. Katie, meanwhile, has focused on raising Suri with quiet strength. She avoids bitterness, choosing gratitude over anger, and often calls her daughter an incredible person who has grown into her own light. Everything she fought for, privacy, stability, independence, has finally taken root. But even with her new name and new life, Suri still carries the weight of a childhood shaped by fame, fear, and silence. And as she steps deeper into adulthood, one question hangs heavier than ever. Will she ever open the door to her father again? Or has the distance become part of who she is? For nearly 2 decades, the world watched a story unfold that was never fully explained. A father rising higher in fame, while a daughter quietly walked away from his shadow. What began as a whirlwind romance and a picture-perfect family slowly became a tale of silence, distance, and a young girl growing up in 2 different worlds at once. Suri gained something priceless: freedom, stability, and the space to discover who she really is. She found her voice, her identity, and a life that isn't controlled by headlines or Hollywood expectations. But that independence came with a cost: the absence of a father who once called her his miracle. Tom gained success beyond anything most actors could imagine. He conquered the box office, stunned fans with impossible stunts, and became one of the most iconic figures in film history. But all the fame, all the applause, and all the achievements couldn't rebuild the connection he lost with his youngest child. Now, as Suri steps into adulthood with a new name and a new future, the biggest question remains unanswered. Will she ever let her father back into her life? Or has the silence between them become a divide too deep for even time to repair? It's a story without a clear ending, one shaped by love, fear, protection, and choices no child should ever have to face. Drop your thoughts in the comments and hit subscribe for more stories that stay with you long after they end.